Hola, yo me llamo Melanie Centeno y esto es Negro y Latina. Hi, my name is Melanie Centeno. This is Black and Latino. Or Latina, or Latinx, or whatever the fuck.
The African presence in Latin America largely contributed to what made Latin America what it is today. From Cuba to Brazil to Colombia. And yet, when we think of Latin America, we're not taught to think about black people. Thanks to stereotypes set by the media, the world still sees Latinos as people who phenotypically appear as the J-Los, the Malumas, the George Lopez's. But what about the black Latinos? The Celia Cruzes, the Valder Pereiras, the Wyclef Jeans? Yes, Haitians are also Latinos. But anyway, it's time to put some respect on their name. This is Black and Latino.
So, let's get into it. You ready? Y'all ready? You good? Okay. So really quick, so when I asked you to be a part of this, the first thing you said was, well, do you know any darker Afro-Latinos?
Yes.
And I truly appreciate like the self-awareness, but why did you, what made you say that?
I'm realizing how now that being black is cool, right? Because before it wasn't. And people are now identifying with the Afro side of their heritage, specifically in Latin America. They're slowly but surely like erasing the blackest of the black people in Latin America. And so the face of Afro-Latinidad should not be me. The face of Afro-Latinidad should be someone who is darker complected, who have more quote unquote Afro features, because those are the people who are most ostracized and most erased. But as this term Afro-Latino has gained popularity and the pride and black pride has taken on, then people who are lighter complected have taken over. I'm a mixed race woman. Obviously, I present as a black woman, I identify as a black woman, but I am mixed race. So whenever I'm given an opportunity to speak on Afro-Latinidad, I wanna make sure that you've basically exhausted all other options. You've not been able to find someone who is darker complected to be able to speak on. And then I can say, okay, well, if you made that effort and I don't know anyone else who is available, then I'll also take on that position to make sure that I'm not taking up space where I shouldn't take up that much space.
Now that you identify as Afro-Latino, does your family have an issue with that?
Some of my family members do, and some of my family members don't. What's funny is my whitest family member doesn't, right? But I have a brother who will not identify as black. Mind you, he might be 2 shades lighter than you, coarser hair. If somebody looks at him, they're like, this nigga's black. This nigga's a nigga, right? But again, I'm from New York City and we identify mostly with our nation, right? So I'm Puerto Rican. He's like, nobody will see me as black. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm looking at him like, our grandfather was black as fuck. What are you talking about? As soon as he steps foot outside of New York City, you a black ass man. And he has even experienced that. He was in Florida once. And he stopped in the gas station, and this white man came out with his shotgun and said, y'all niggas need to get the fuck up out of my gas station. And he was shocked. And I'm like, well, he did that because you a nigga to him. Right. You are a black man, but he will refuse to identify as a black person. But then I have siblings who obviously identify as black. Like my twin sister, she has more Afro features. So when people look at her, there's no telling. Everybody just thinks that she was a light-skinned black girl. And growing up, we used to get this thing where they would just think she's a light-skinned black girl, but they would think I'm biracial. But I was darker complected. I was darker complected my whole entire life. I had to at some point realize that I'm not white. And then I have another brother who understands that he is obviously like mixed race, and to the world, they see him as not quite white, not quite black, but he still kind of wrestles with the idea of identifying as black because he's so fair complected. My mother's mixed race, technically. My grandmother was like whiter Latina, and my grandfather was a black Latino. They're both Puerto Rican. My father was almost white. How come I'm looking like this? You have no idea how the coin's gonna toss. I grew up in foster care, and my foster families, majority of them were African American. And then I did have some foster homes were white, and I had some foster homes that were like whiter Latinos. And I never fit into the whiter Latino homes. And I always felt ostracized in those homes. But in the black homes, I felt right at home. They never ostracized me, and their family also was like, some dark skin, some light skin. I just kind of fit in as one of the mixed kids. People would ask me, like in elementary school, like, hey, you black? And I'm like, I think so.
So before we dive into what an Afro Latino or Latina is, like, I think we need to start with the basics, right? And to do that, we have to kind of define and explain the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality. So for you, in your opinion, what is the definition of race?
Race would be what is your racial presentation. Since obviously race is a social construct, the world in the US defines race by which is what you look like phenotypically. So your skin color, your facial features, your hair texture, so on and so forth.
And what about ethnicity?
Ethnicity would be like where your ethnic group is. So when I think ethnic group, I think like a group of people in a global area that share cultural characteristics. So like language, music, food, so on and so forth.
And what is nationality?
Nationality is also, I feel like, global, but it's specific to a nation. So the name of that nation within the confines of where that nation is, latitude, longitude, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. So with that being said, how do you identify? What do you identify as?
How do I identify? I identify as an Afro-Boricua. So I guess my race would obviously be black. My ethnicity would be Puerto Rican, because that's also an ethnic group as well as a nationality. And my nationality, unfortunately, is American, but I guess my nationality could also be Puerto Rican, technically.
So by definition, what is an Afro-Latino?
So by definition, an Afro-Latino would basically be, like, in the most layman's terms, black people in Latin America. That is what an Afro-Latino is. Spanish speaking or Romance language based nation. So technically a Latino, a Haitian would be Latino, a Brazilian would be Latino, but technically a Jamaican wouldn't be Latino since that was British conquered the land that is now known as Jamaica.
So why do you think that when we think about Latin America, we don't think about Haitians, we don't think about Brazilians?
Because when you think about the word Latino, it was a word used to characterize people who spoke Spanish by Napoleon Bonaparte.
Bruh.
That specifically in the beginning, that was what was characteristic of Latinos, that they spoke Spanish because a French person decided to categorize those people as Latino. But then at the same token, there's so many other languages spoken in Latin America. So they kind of put everybody under this umbrella term. But what I feel like is, especially when you talk about Haiti, one of the reasons why, and Brazil, one of the reasons why you don't necessarily think of them as Latinos, not only that they speak language, but these are primarily black nations. And because of the anti-blackness that exists historically in Latin America, these two nations were definitely thought of as like other nations, specifically speaking about Haiti, because that was like the first free black nation. And it was necessary for like the white elite to ostracize that nation, to not give other black peoples in the Caribbean and in Latin America the impetus to want to also be free nations.
What is the difference between Latino and Hispanic?
A Hispanic is people from Spain and people from countries that speak Spanish, that the Spaniards conquered these nations. And then when you think Latin America, you're specifically thinking about people who live in what is known as Latin America, which would be the Caribbean, Mexico, Central and South America, and primarily those people who speak not English.
Do you know like how many Africans were taken to Latin America?
Of like the 4.5 million enslaved Africans that came to the New World, about 500,000 came to what is known as like the United States, and 4 million went to what is known as the Caribbean and Latin America.
And I also recently learned that the largest population of black people outside of Africa is in Brazil. I was going to ask you that too. Like, how has black culture influenced Latin America?
There would be no Latin American culture without the black influence in that culture, in the food, in the music, in the dance, in the language, in the way that people speak these languages. For instance, the way Puerto Ricans speak, Dominicans speak. Why is it different really from the way that Mexicans speak, the way that Spaniards speak in Spain, is because of the Afro influence in the linguistics of how we use the words, right? So when Africans were learning how to speak Spanish, there were certain words or certain letters and sounds that were not familiar to them linguistically. They drop a lot of R's, S's, T's, D's. They completely drop these sounds in the Spanish language.
And what type of music did Africans influence in Latin America?
Well, when you think about African influence of music, primarily you think about drums. So any percussive instrument, and a lot of the times the drums and the way that the rhythms are. So not necessarily just the drums, but the percussive rhythms.
So it's safe to say that like salsa, bachata, merengue, like that's...
Literally, there's no Latin American music that you know of now that has no African influence. So like you said, salsa, merengue, bachata, reggaeton, cumbia. Literally in every single Latin American nation, there is a group of black people. There are about 1.4 million black people in Mexico. So really, when you think about it, there's no way to think about Latin America without thinking about the black influence.
If African Americans can come in all shades, you know, from the lightest of the light with blue eyes and whatever to the darkest of the dark, and we're all seen as black. Like, why can't Afro Latino?
So when you think about in the US, right, they had this one drop rule. The one drop rule doesn't really exist in Latin America when you think about like race. Generally speaking, in Latin America, when you think about race, it's what you look like. If you look black, then you are black. So then the other thing is that because in America, black is the culture as well. So a lot of people who are very, very fairly complected, white passing, we'll say, who are black culturally, and because their family is black, there's no way that their family is gonna tell them, no, you can't be black because you look white. When you belong to this culture, you came out of my vagina. You get what I'm saying? And then in Latin America, there was always this idea of purposely whitening yourself, right? We have this term called mejorar la raza, right? So when you mejorar la raza, that generally says marry somebody white so your kids could look white so they can have more opportunity. That's literally what that term means. There was a time where you could purchase whiteness, right? Because if you were not white, you couldn't hold office, you couldn't be a doctor, lawyer, teacher, any of these positions if you were not white. But if you could prove that you had any white ancestry, literally the opposite of the one drop rule. If you could prove that you had any white ancestry, you could petition to the Spanish government to purchase whiteness and then be granted the opportunity to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a banker, and all these things. So now you see how that kind of plays out differently, where in Latin America, the goal is almost to be white.
So let me ask you this. Have you ever heard someone say, I'm Dominican, I'm not black?
Yes, I've definitely heard that. That is due to that internalized anti-blackness, the way that history set out that idea in Latin America to always aspire to whiteness. And also, I can also blame, I feel like, American media for painting such a poor picture of what black people are in America, right? So when Dominicans say, I know black, I'm Dominican, it is one, you already know, it is one, their internalized racism and their internalized anti-blackness, but two, also the stereotypes that are perpetuated by American media about black people, that they feel like they need to, separate themselves as far as possible from that because they don't want to be seen in that negative light.
Why do you think people assume you're not black if you speak Spanish as your first language? And this is particularly for like darker skinned Latinos who are obviously black, but...
I think that white supremacy has done a great job at divide and conquer. And that's why when someone speaks Spanish, all of a sudden they're not really black or they have not lived the black experience. People do that unintentionally, not really knowing the history and understanding that the black experience is a global experience, specifically in Latin America, in that we share in that same painful history of being enslaved.
Why do you think we have such a hard time like grasping the fact that you can be both black and Latino?
generally speaking, when you see Latinos on TV, film, in telenovelas, most of the people who are the stars of the telenovelas look straight up white. And the people in the telenovelas who are the maids, the servants, the butlers, and so on and so forth, the prostitutes, they're dark-skinned Latinos. But nobody's paying attention to that, right? Through the American lens, black is this. You can't be black and Latino in an American lens. That erasure in both Latin America and America has a lot to do why people can't really not even differentiate or just understand that you can be both. Even myself, for instance, typically, like I present as a black woman. So there's no way that I could deny that. When you look at the black Latinos who are big name, they don't necessarily play Latinos. They obviously play black people, right? So the Rosario Dawsons, she's Puerto Rican, and the Laz Alonso, Gina Torres, Lala Anthony, but then you think about Fabulous, he's Dominican. Noriega, Fabulous is Dominican. Noriega is Puerto Rican.
So let me ask you about Amara La Negra. Because there was an issue where people were saying she wasn't black because she spoke Spanish.
That is ridiculous. Look at her.
Well, why is it okay if Beyonce is black?
Look at Amara La Negra. I think the policing of blackness can be an issue sometimes within the diaspora, but specifically, I'm gonna say this, it's gonna be unpopular, but I feel like a lot of the times black people pick and choose who they feel they could be black and who they feel can't be black. You calling Zendaya black, but you calling Amara La Negra not black? How? Her skin is literally black. For the ones who are watching this who are phenotypically black, but they speak Spanish, what advice would you give to someone in that space where they're kind of confused about who they are? I think the advice that I give to black Latinos who feel like they're on the fence, they feel like they're not black enough, they feel like they're not Latino enough, is to just embrace all of who you are and just be proud about everything, but also do a lot of that historical digging that America doesn't allow you to in the educational system so that you can have a pride. Right? When you start looking historically about the black history of Latin America, you find so many black heroes, right? And I think that's where it starts. You need to find something to be prideful in. Arturo Schomburg, who I mentioned to you earlier on the phone, Arturo Schomburg was a black Puerto Rican. He came to New York during the Cuban Puerto Rican Black Independence Movement, and he helped found black history. So once you start finding the pride in those things, then you can come to terms with no, I'm black and Latino, and you can't separate the two. And at the same token, so that when you come face to face with someone who's for instance, a black American who's trying to police your blackness and tell you not black enough, you could sit down and tell them I understand why you could possibly think that way, but understand this, and get them the facts. Then you give them the education for that ass, and they can't deny your blackness. Now they have to also realize, shit, I am also a puppet of white supremacy right now. I have to undo and unlearn as well, so then we can become more united as a people and we could fight white supremacy together. You get what I'm saying? So that's the advice that I got. I love that for you. Where can we find you on social media? You can find me at Melanie Moves. Oh, and then also you can find me on latv.com. I host a show called Blacktinidad. You can watch all the episodes where I also help educate on the black history of Latin America, and also interview a bunch of black people in Latin America to continue to amplify black voices in Latin America. Thank you so much for coming through. Love you. Yeah, no problem. I'm here for it. I'm in here. All right.